Wizards of the Coast has come out and confirmed that going forwards, there will be no more premier sets like the Dungeons and Dragons set we just got. From this point forwards, any non-magic IPs will not be put into standard legal sets.
Magic. I am a wizard! History. I'm an old wizard! The magic historian. My bones hurt.
Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles, my friends. I hope the day finds you well. We are here to talk about a very big subject, the idea of non-magic IPs no longer being a part of premier releases. Now, I know that this is a big subject because over the last week, I have gotten more communication about this one particular subject than anything else. Emails, messages, people talking about it in Discord, live streams. There's a number of people who want to dive into that subject, and today is the day we're going to do so. But before we do that, I want to talk about something I'm super hyped up about. Over on my other channel, Fantasy Geographic, where we cover Magic lore, the final installment of the Time Stream Chronicles is coming out this weekend. It is one of the most epic storylines from Magic's history, and we will be completing it this weekend. So I invite you to come on by and check it out. And if you're not already familiar with the series, I'm going to leave a link to the playlist at the end of this video so you can catch up on all the lore amazingness. And if you're newer to Magic, trust me when I say this, old school Magic lore will blow your socks off clean through the door because it was so good back then. Anyhow, enough about that. Let us dive in to the meat of the subject at hand. So, going forwards, there will be no more premier Magic the Gathering sets that include non-magic IPs. If you're not familiar with the parlance of Magic, premier is a more recent term that Wizards of the Coast has decided to apply to their standard set releases. And by standard sets, I mean the cards that are used in the standard format, right? The word standard is such a generic term that it can be used to mean multiple things, but think Kaldheim, Strixhaven, the Dungeons and Dragons set we just got, those are premier sets. Things like Double Masters, Modern Horizons 2, stuff like that are not premier sets, which always makes me laugh because things like the Modern Horizons cost significantly more than premier sets, but aren't premier editions. It's all just a big word salad language nonsense kind of setup. Corporatism at its finest. So, we got confirmation of what's going down through Mark Rosewater, specifically on his Tumblr. So I'll put the post up on the screen so we can go through it together. So, Mark Rosewater was asked, "Oh, hi, Mark." There you go. Nice little room reference for you. Tommy was so. Oh, hi, Mark. I did not hit her. Anyways, I just wanted to thank you for an amazing year of Magic. I loved Kaldheim, and Strixhaven has become my all-time favorite set. However, I am not a fan of AFR, which is Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, Dungeons and Dragons set. It's interesting how the individual went ahead and put the full names of the sets that they loved. Well, I guess not the full name because it's Strixhaven School of Mages. But either way, they get the full name there, and the Dungeons and Dragons is shortened down to AFR. Get that out of here! So, I'm not a fan of AFR, and it has me concerned for the future of premier sets. I wish premier sets were reserved for Magic's own IP. And Mark Rosewater has a very simple one-line response that has obviously a big impact to people mentally. And that statement is, future sets with non-magic properties will not be premier sets. Now, I don't know if it's just me, but looking at it, there's almost like a tone to it. Obviously, when it comes to text communication, you can't really always pick up on what people are trying to say. I encounter that sometimes in my live streams where it's like all I have to go on are these words. I don't have your body language. I don't have your actual tone of voice, all the mannerisms as well to determine exactly how you feel about this. But the way that I read this, every time I've looked at it, I feel like Rosewater has probably got a million responses from people saying, I don't like this. And he's finally just like I'm done with this. And he heard from the higher ups, and it's like, oh man, okay, we're not doing premier sets that have non-Magic IPs. But it almost feels like there's a tone of disappointment to it as well. Maybe Rosewater was actually working on a non-Magic IP for a premiere set, and word came down that they've got to scrap it and replace it with something else, because that happens all the time. For example, Throne of Eldraine was supposed to have 2 sets, but the second Throne of Eldraine was scrapped, and they hastily put together Ikoria, mostly in my opinion, as a vehicle for Godzilla merchandising. That was originally the plan. That was when we started to see that was the tip of the iceberg, showing that Wizards is finally trying to reach out to non-Magic IPs, right? So this sort of like shenanigan changing what's going on behind the scenes probably happens on a regular basis. There is certainly a subset of the Magic population who strongly believes that Strixhaven was supposed to have a Harry Potter tie-in. And that's a perfectly reasonable assumption, because I fall into that camp. I genuinely believe that originally Harry Potter was going to be an IP that they connected to Strixhaven. But ultimately, this reads to me like behind the scenes, the word came down, AFR sales are way below what we're looking for. This is garbage. We're never doing it again. Because the way that they operate at that company is you can have a really cool idea for Magic the Gathering, but if it doesn't get past the higher ups, it doesn't happen. And the higher ups view everything in terms of numerical dollars. That is the language they speak. If you've ever wondered why we go back to Zendikar 3 or 4 times, Innistrad 3 or 4 times, Ravnica 3 or 4 times, but where's Kamigawa? Where's Lorwyn? Why haven't we been back to Alara? There are a bunch of worlds that Wizards of the Coast owns that we have never returned to. And the reason for that is because they didn't sell well enough. So they want to use names that have recognition, but are also associated with whatever threshold of dollars a set has to make to be considered one of their better selling sets. That is literally how things work. I've read posts from Rosewater before talking about basically when people complain about cards being too powerful, he comes along with, admittedly, I'm in between a rock and a hard place style scenario where he says, look, if I make the cards too powerful, we're going to have to ban them. We run into problems. If I don't make the cards powerful enough, the set doesn't do well enough, and then we can never go back to that world. So you have a balance of you have to make the world powerful enough that it gets the sales, people buy it or whatever, but you don't want it to be too powerful, because then you run into the Throne of Eldraine problem, which is something we can talk about in another video if you guys are interested. But Throne of Eldraine literally ruined Standard for 2 years from the perspective of other sets getting to make a dent, really. Throne of Eldraine had so much power packed in it that it is looming over all of Standard, and it is the yardstick with which we measure all of the stuff that's available from premier sets, because it's the highest power level. We've seen this happen before in the past, although on a bigger scale back in the day with Mirrodin. The whole Mirrodin block was bonkers crazy, and it completely warped things around to the point where they had to take active steps and change the way that they design Magic sets. But anyways, you've got a scenario where the sets have to pop, because if they don't, you don't make the money, and then you don't get to do it again. And so AFR was the experiment where they were going to take a non-Magic property, and one that honestly feels like it has a fair bit of overlap with Magic. Like, Magic the Gathering is swords and sorcery. Dungeons and Dragons is swords and sorcery. There's not a lot of futuristic stuff. Yes, Magic does have some, like, okay, they've got some cars and helicopters and stuff in sets like Kaladesh, which I'm not a fan of, and does diverge from what I really consider to be traditional Magic. But Magic overall is a swords and sorcery. We're going to use swords instead of like pew, 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 lasers and stuff like that. And we're going to use magic instead of science and technology. That's genuinely the way that it goes. So Magic and Dungeons and Dragons have a lot of overlap and a lot of fans that have an intersection of enjoyment over both of them. So you would think that the Dungeons and Dragons set would be a natural choice to succeed in this regard, but it didn't succeed. Clearly, it has failed. Now, if you're asking yourself, wait, How has it failed? How are you able to say that it's failed? Well, it's very clear if you look at the information I just laid out, where to return to a world, we have to have made X number of dollars in profit as Wizards of the Coast. Same thing applies here. To do another premier standard release set that is based on a non-Magic IP, this introductory, exploratory Adventures in the Forgotten Realm set had to do well. Basically, it's like the canary in the coal mine, because it seems like they're very reactive to the way things sell in terms of like quickly going, okay, throw that on the trash fail pile. And that's what Adventures in the Forgotten Realms is. It's going to have to be viewed from that lens, because Wizards of the Coast clearly does not view it as a success. If they viewed it as a success, we would be getting a very different answer to this question. And it would say, little like winky face, just wait and see what we have in store kind of thing, right? It would have that more hopeful and triumphant kind of vibe. And ultimately, it does feel like Adventures in the Forgotten Realm has fallen flat. I remember when spoilers first started rolling out for it, I was pretty excited. I was like, okay, this is going to be pretty sweet, man. The cards they were showing had some nice flavor to it, but ultimately, the set kind of fell flat. You had a number of different complaints that people had about the set. Some people found that having keywords that weren't keywords, just descriptive flavor words, like you have a creature that when it comes into play gives you 2 life. So it says cure light wounds. And that's literally just a descriptive term that comes from like, oh, look, it's a Dungeons and Dragons healing spell. But that caused confusion. Then there were things like, you see a guard approach as a spell name, which is really just a phrase that you would hear in Dungeons and Dragons. That didn't sit well with some people. I wasn't really a fan of that. One of the bigger problems was the fact that the set didn't really connect for people who are already Magic fans and like Dungeons and Dragons in terms of a number of cards not feeling like they actually felt like the Dungeons and Dragons cards, like our creatures, right? So you would have this creature in Dungeons and Dragons that would be terrible and intimidating, and you didn't want to run into it, like a bullet, for example. And then the card comes along of this insane creature you don't want to run into when you're out adventuring in the world, and it's just pretty much a generic, forgettable, whatever card. And this goes all the way from the bottom, all the way up to crazy big things like the Tarrasque not feeling like the Tarrasque. And I'm a huge green player. I love playing mono green, and I love the Tarrasque as a card in my deck, but it doesn't feel like the Tarrasque from D&D. So you have all these factors coming along, right? And like I said, Throne of Eldraine is looming over standard. The Dungeons and Dragons set does not have a lot of crazy powerful cards in it. So it's shadowed in that way as well. And in recent times, Wizards of the Coast sales have been doing amazingly overall, right? They're having like a boom right now rather than a bust. They're trying to basically double their profits over a 5-year period, and they're succeeding. Every indicator says that they're succeeding. So this is a time of success, and the Dungeons and Dragons set has clearly failed in the middle of it. So for me, I do have to say, I am 100% fine with this decision. I like Magic the Gathering being Magic the Gathering. I was totally okay with them putting Dungeons and Dragons into it to a degree because there was enough overlap, but there was a little bit of me that felt like, okay, you know what, like I kind of just like Magic to be Magic, and knowing that going forwards Magic is just going to be Magic in some ways is comforting to me, but at the end of the day, that's just a personal preference, so it doesn't mean that that's how things have to be or that's the correct way to do things. But ultimately, Wizards of the Coast has looked at the numbers. They've deemed that the Dungeons and Dragons set was a failure, which does not bode well for any future Dungeons and Dragons set. In fact, I don't expect to ever see another full-on Dungeons and Dragons Magic the Gathering set ever again. What I could see happening is either a secret lair or some other kind of box set where they take some of the most iconic things that didn't show up in this D&D set that everybody's clamoring for. So for example, one of the biggest misses from the Dungeons and Dragons set is Elminster. How do you not have Elminster in there, right? So I could see them making some kind of box set or something where they include the extra characters and stuff like that way. But I don't ever see them making a full Dungeons and Dragons set again in non-Premier, because it couldn't sell well being a Premier set. How's it going to sell being some kind of side, not main release, right? I mean, if you give it the biggest spotlight you can give a set, which is what happens with Premier sets, they get the most amount of time lavished on advertising, world building, and things like that. So originally, I thought that we would see maybe more D&D core sets. But going forwards, I expect we're going to see a return to regular core sets. So for 2022, when they do the announcement on the 24th, I expect that we're going to have a scenario where they're going to say, hey, we're bringing back the core set. So ultimately, this really just tracks as a failure for Adventures in the Forgotten Realms overall, and it does mean we will never be seeing non-Magic canon worlds in Premier sets, so they'll only show up in side products. And as somebody who's a big fan of Magic the Gathering, I am totally fine with that. I know there's some people who are going to be disappointed. I understand your disappointment, and I feel for you, because nobody likes it when you find out the stuff that you're a fan of isn't going to be coming back. But at the end of the day, I've been playing Magic since 1994, and I like seeing Magic be Magic. So put everything in the universes beyond, all of that sort of stuff, into other products, and let our standard releases be all Magic canon worlds. So those are my thoughts on the subject. Let me know yours, because I know there's a lot of opinions floating out there about this, and a lot of people contacted me about it. And thank you for that, my friends. It's nice to be able to get a read on what people are most interested in hearing about. So let me know your thoughts. If you like what I'm doing here, then give the video a little thumbs up, because that makes me feel good in my tum-tum. I don't know why it's in my tum-tum, but that's where I feel my emotions. Don't judge me. I'm living my best life. Big thank you to all my patrons. If you love what I'm doing, then join these glorious people and become a patron of me on Patreon. And I will see you all, my friends, for the next video.